Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Sorting Thoughts podcast. And in today's episode, we are going to be deep diving into the tricky world of adaptations. Because why not? Sometimes stories get lost, sometimes they stay true, and sometimes they transform into something that's completely new. I chose 3 different adaptations, and we're going to start with the frustrating missteps of the fifth wave. Then we're going to go to the faithful tension of the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and then we'll finish off with the transformative magic of Wicked. We will see together what makes an adaptation succeed. So if you're interested in that, grab some tea, grab some hot chocolate or coffee, and let's get into it. So first things first. We're going to start with a film adaptation that I didn't very much like, and it was The Fifth Wave, directed by Jay Blakeson, that was released in 2016, and it is based on the book written by Rick Yancey, and it is about 16-year-old Cassie Sullivan. She tries to survive in a world devastated by the waves of an alien invasion that has already decimated the population and knocked mankind back to the Stone Age. So what this movie did was it succeeded in missing the novel's tension and complexity totally. Like, in the novel, the pacing and the slow building tension is about survival and about the alien invasion, and it creates a really compelling narrative. And there's also this very psychological complexity with the character of Cassie. And the book really takes the time to build into all of this. But the movie, however, it rushes through these moments, so there's no time really to build the emotional depth of the characters. And with this quicker pace, it completely compromised the psychological aspect of Cassie's internal struggles and how she processes the alien apocalypse and the craziness of it all, because it is crazy. Because she goes from a total normal teenage girl life to a life of survival and crisis. And in the book, Cassie is a very layered character. She's a complex character that has to deal with loss and survival and moral dilemmas. And the film didn't really succeed in capturing that. She's more generic. She's this kind of bland, main, annoying character when she was absolutely not in the book. And that was really frustrating to see. And she wasn't the only one to lose her spark. Other characters lost their depth as well, like Ben and Sam. And the movie doesn't deep dive into their backstories, which is sometimes helpful when you want to hook the audience and make the audience appreciate a certain character or get interested in one. Like, these 2 characters literally just pop up out of nowhere, and specifically Ben, and there's little to no explanation at all, so there can't be any form of attachment or any form of interest in those characters if nothing is explained. And this movie is another one that chose to focus on a love triangle over the big thing, which was surviving the apocalypse and learning a new way of living. And that love triangle really felt forced as the main focus, and it really didn't align with the serious tone of an apocalypse. Like, specifically when the book didn't focus on that, and it wasn't its strength at all. And the real strength of that book was Cassie's complexity and the evolution of the alien apocalypse. And it truly felt like this movie was trying to turn itself into this big dystopian blockbuster movie like Divergent and The Maze Runner were at the time. And by trying to make it that, it lost the whole focus of why the book series was loved, and which was the themes of survival, trust, and humanity's struggle to adapt to a new world and All the film had was action scenes on top of action scenes, explosions, chase scenes. It wasn't even a thoughtful and character driven story that the book offered, which was why it was loved and appreciated for. So, for this one, I would definitely recommend to read the book instead of watching the film. And as it is a book series, I think there's 3, they probably wanted to make it a saga and make 3 films. They only did 1. So that tells you a lot about how great of an adaptation this movie was. Now onto the second film adaptation, and this one is one that I love dearly, and it is The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, written by Susan Collins and directed by Francis Lawrence. It came out in 2023, and it is about 60 years before he becomes the tyrannical president of Panem. Coriolanus Snow sees a change for a change in fortunes when he mentors Lucy Greybeard, the female tribute from District 12. Now that was an adaptation that was done right. One of the best I've ever seen, to be honest, in my opinion. And in general, I feel like the film adaptations of the Hunger Games series are really good. They only did one general change on one of the characters, and that only turned that character for the better, and that character was Peeta. And they decided to keep his leg after the first film, because in the books, he's missing a leg after the first game when Cato injures him with his sword, and his wound gets infected, and it never recovered, and so they had to cut his leg. They had to ampute him, and so I feel like keeping Peeta's leg in the films was for the better, and it made Peeta even greater as a character, I feel like. But we're not here to talk about the previous adaptations, but about the prequel film adaptation of The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, with none other than Tom Blythe and the one and only Rachel Zegler. So this adaptation was very respectful and faithful to the source material that was the book, and the film did a great job capturing the essence of the story and its characters. The film absolutely magnificently translated the book to a motion picture, and I feel like that's one of the best that I've ever seen in a while in these past few years, because I have read other books that have been adapted and there's always one thing missing, and sometimes the most important thing missing is the essence of the book. And with this one, I was absolutely not disappointed. I was even more amazed at how good of an adaptation this one is, and it really gives a chance to adaptations and how good they can be if they are done with the right source material and with the right people. That has to be taken into accountability, because if you do not work with the right people, it can turn into a disastrous adaptation. And Susan Collins knows how to work with the right people. So when Susan Collins announced this prequel about the origin story of Coriolanus Snow, there was no way for her to disappoint the audience and her readers, and we knew she wouldn't disappoint, because she's one of those authors that only writes because she has something to say, something new to say about our society today, and that's one of the things that I love about Susan Collins, and she does it in a very beautiful way. So there was actually no room for disappointment, really, about this book and the other prequel book about Haymitch, and maybe there was a lot of anticipation of it being as good as the others, I feel like, and expectations were met. Like, even she went even above expectations. And so when it came to it being turned into a movie and the announcement of Francis Lawrence being involved again as a director, like the first 3 movies, I knew the movie was never going to disappoint at all, and it didn't. it didn't. I have never seen an adaptation so truthfully accurate to what the book is. Like, usually you imagine how things are in your head, but they're obviously going to be different in the movie. But no, not for this one. Everything in this film was exactly as I imagined it in my head. Do you know how rare this is? And I've talked about this with my friend that's also very involved in the Hunger Games franchise. And when she read the book and when she watched the trailer for the movie of that said book, she said the exact same thing, that she had imagined everything that was in the trailer in her head. Like she had imagined the same thing in her head. And that's even more rare for two people to have imagined the same thing. Because usually, like, depending on people, colors do change and, like certain details change. But for the both of us, nothing had changed and everything was as it was portrayed in the film. And that was crazy. And I went on Twitter that day and I remember seeing a lot of people saying that this is exactly how they had imagined it in their head. Do you know how crazy that is? That is absolutely crazy and absolutely rare. And that just tells you how good of an adaptation this was, because Susan had detailed everything so much that it was easy to adapt it into a film and easy to imagine as well. That's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. And I still cannot wrap my head around this fact. One thing that was different though from my imagination was the costumes. That was the only thing that was different, because they sort of reimagined some stuff so they could look appealing on the screen. And specifically Lucy Graybart's dress, the one from the film, is a lot more beautiful than the one Susan had written, but it is pretty normal for the costumes to be pretty different. But they did stay with the color red for the student costumes, so that was pretty close. Another thing I loved about this adaptation was that the film also respected the book's structure of the narration. So if you've read the book, you know that the book is divided in 3 parts, and that's what they also did with the film. And they literally had it saying part 1, blah, 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 part 2, blah, 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 part 3, blah, blah, blah. And I loved that. I love when some films do that. I feel like it adds something, It had the book's core moments, and it also had the very emotional depth and struggles of Snow's very complex character. And shout out to Tom Blythe, because he did an absolute amazing job portraying Snow. Another reason why this book is one of the greatest adaptations I've ever seen is that the book is an inner monologue of Snow's thoughts. And that's really hard to depict in a movie. And Tom Blythe's acting was on point, because it really showed the duality of Snow's good and bad intentions and him battling with himself with different thoughts and actions and things that we know him to be in the main Hunger Games trilogy. And that was so interesting to see and so interesting to dig into what turned Snow into President Snow. And the gradual shift was so freaky. His character development really is one of the most interesting I've ever seen. Like, how does one become so ruthless and so unemotional and so detached? Like, how does one become like that? There has to be so many factors in his life that must have led him to be like this. And that was crazy to see. Also, the cinematography of this dystopian society and the sets were so beautiful. They really did an amazing job. And for the most part, I'm so glad that they used real buildings and that there wasn't much CGI. And I feel like that's what makes it more wholesome, if you know what I mean. And it's one thing that's been lacking in these past few years in the film industry. Real sets, real buildings, real set being built. And I feel like that way, with it being all real, Panem felt very real. And the whole story felt more real. So it really participated into the fact that it is a great adaptation. And I loved it. I highly recommend you to read the book and then watch the film. You'll see what I mean, and you're going to be in for a ride, and it's going to be a beautiful one. And last but not least, an adaptation that was beautifully done, and one that went beyond and created a whole universe, is none other than Wicked, that was written by Gregory Maguire, then turned into a Broadway musical by Stephen Schwartz and Winnie Holzman, and finally, 2-part movies directed by John M. Chu. The story of Wicked is about the land of Oz. Ostracized and misunderstood green-skinned Elphaba is forced to share a room with the popular aristocrat Glinda at Shiz University. And the two's unlikely friendship is tested as they begin to fulfill their respective destinies as Glinda the Good and the Wicked Witch of the West. Wicked is just one of those adaptations that just keeps on getting better. Every book is good. The musical is great, but the movie is magnificent. The Wicked book by Gregory Maguire is very, very dark compared to the musical and the film. The themes of this book are very dark, very political, and very psychological. It really does reinterpret The Wizard of Oz with a twist. But then it got turned into a musical, and the musical spun this dark theme and made it more bubbly and poppy. It kept those dark themes, but they underlined them. They are more implicit than explicit. But when you pay close attention, you definitely notice it because it is there. It is much more hopeful and emotional. So overall, the musical turned the tone for the better, I feel like. Because The Wizard of Oz is also very bubbly and poppy, and I loved that they got closer to those roots because it's a lot warmer, and I feel like the essence of Wicked, when you just look at the tip of the iceberg, is that it's very warm to the eyes, but then you have the hidden part of the iceberg where it is sad and complex and politically inclined. See, this is what I meant when I said that earlier. Those darker themes from the book are very much underlined. They are the hidden part of the iceberg and not just the tip, and the colorful colors and the songs and, So after a musical, they expanded the world of Wicked and turned it into a 2-part film. And now we have this very beautiful, modern representation of Oz that's a direct nod to the 1939 film. And we deep dive into the relationship of Glinda and Elphaba a lot more. It has, this big timeless theme of good versus evil, but it depicts it in a way that it isn't always good or evil, but more in between with a lot of gray areas. And that's one of the things that I love about Wicked is that, it isn't because something happens that it is 100% true. Like there's 2 sides to the story, and I love how Wicked jumps between the 2 sides of the story, with one side being Glinda and the other side being Elphaba. And one of Wicked's greatest strengths is that it has fantastic music. Every single song gets you to your core. Like, I don't know what kind of magic or drug Stephen Schwartz incorporated in those songs. There's not one that's better than the other. Like it really hits every single feeling you've ever felt in your own life. All of them resonate with the audience on some levels, and it's beautiful. And it is one of the reasons why the Broadway musical became what it is and how it has lived on for 20 years. The character depth of the main characters, Elphaba and Glinda, really hooks the audience. Like they have a very complex and multi-layered relationship, which makes it 10 times more beautiful and 10 times more interesting. Their rivalry, their friendship, their understanding of each other's boundaries, and their differences are really the key emotional beats of this story. And, their personal growth is going to be so interesting to see in the second part that comes out next week. And I'm really excited to see what they're going to do with it. And because you know how the Broadway musical is the same length time as the first film. So now that we're digging into the second part, that is going to be very nuanced and there's going to be a lot more duality to it. And this second part is really going to dig into the dark tones of the movie and propaganda, and it's going to be a lot more political than the first one was. Like, the first one was just barely touching those darker tones, barely. This second one is really going to dig into it, and it's going to be beautiful, and the songs are going to be beautiful, and I just can't wait to see it. And yeah, I'm very excited. And also, by adding those darker tones to the movie, to The Wizard of Oz, to the book, to the musical, it just keeps on building the story, and it keeps giving material, and that's what makes it a great adaptation in a way that it expands to infinite possibilities, really. But possibilities that do not go all over the place, of course. Like, they stay in the story. They just keep on building it. And that's beautiful to be able to do that, Another thing that makes this movie and this universe a great adaptation is that I feel like Oz is also a place where a lot of people fly to sometimes in their imagination to escape their reality. And what a great way to escape to this beautiful land. Like, the team did an amazing job at bringing to life those stunning landscapes by planting 9 million tulips. Who does that now these days? It almost felt like a stage production, but for a motion picture, and everything was just so beautiful. And I think if you look into it, there's a lot more real sets and real set designs and real things than CGI. Like, CGI was used for Alphaba flying, and that's normal because we cannot fly as humans. And the way that they incorporated the CGI in the most intelligent way, by not overdoing it, but just doing it as it needed to be, and using real sets, real set buildings, real things, just like the ballads of Songbirds and Snakes. It made Oz feel real, Like, I just know that John M. Chu worked with the right people, just like Susan Collins works with the right people to make a great adaptation. Like, you can feel in the production of Wicked, in the way they shot the film, that every single person who worked on Wicked wanted to perpetuate the legacy built over those 20 years on Broadway, and they perfectly brought it to life with its message of empowerment, acceptance, and questioning an authority. So overall, Wicked started this as this small little book inspired by The Wizard of Oz, written by L.B. Frank, and they turned it into this beautiful musical, which then became this magnificent film, and it is a whole new world on its own now. So many people did not know what Wicked was, and it really expanded the Wicked family with the movie, and I love that. So to finish this episode off, what makes a good adaptation? I feel like a good adaptation is one that doesn't only rely faithfully on the source material, but expands it and makes us enjoy what we first read all over again with new details, new takes, new developments that don't overstep on the main storyline. So overall, just an adaptation that just deepens it. comment down below if you can on Spotify or YouTube and tell me which adaptation you loved the most and which adaptation you hated the most. I hope you guys liked this episode, and I hope to see you next week. Bye, guys.